fundamentally unhealthiness of the standard American diet, which is really based in meat and dairy and, highly processed foods. And despite the fact that the science is irrefutable. And in fact, in the talk today, I showed a picture. I said, now think about this. In my lifetime, you could go to the hospital and the doctors would be smoking on rounds. And there would be ashtrays in the patient rooms. The only time you couldn't smoke in a room is that there was oxygen. And that was despite decades of clear and irrefutable evidence that smoking caused cancer, along with a whole plethora of other diseases. Yet today, you can walk into the CCU after someone's had a heart attack or bypass surgery, and they can order bacon and eggs and a glass of milk for breakfast, despite the same kind of decades of clear and irrefutable evidence. And I think we are just so disconnected from food and where our food comes from, that we've got, we've been almost brainwashed by the industry, whether it be the dairy industry, the meat industry, the influence they have on the dietary guidelines is where I used to get my advice, until I was enlightened, 8 or 9 years ago. So I think it really gets, I think what we saw in that room, Dotsie, last week was really fundamentally reflected the attitudes and how far we have drifted from this connection between food and our health and performance and the environment. I mean, and the compassion. I mean, all of it really.
When I left, 2 athletes and 2 coaches and the marketing director all came up to me separately. It was hard to get out of there. I mean, it was not that I was running out, but saying, thank you so much for coming. This is so progressive. We need this so much. Each one of them had their own story of, I've taken some animal foods out slowly, but surely I'm feeling better. It's really interesting to track my performance. This is what our kids and parents need. We really hope this goes through. So there was so much hope from, and I will say that's the younger, it was younger dudes, right? Because they were coaches and athletes and they said, oh man, we're just going to be so thrilled if this happens. So I was like, okay, I wanted to share that with you. So
that's great.
Right now.
That's great news,
yeah.
So one of the reasons you are such a good communicator, Dr. Loomis, with these kind of groups is that not too long ago you were one of them, weren't you? So tell us a little bit about what got you to a plant-based diet.
Sure. Well, it's still true today, unfortunately. Medical students today, and medical students, way back when I was in med school decades ago, we just didn't learn anything about nutrition. Nutrition was really a glorified biochemistry class. We learned about carbohydrates and protein, and we learned what happened if you didn't get enough of those things, and what happens if you didn't get enough vitamins, and the clinical disease states that occurred. But we didn't learn anything about the connection between diet and health, really. And so I viewed myself as kind of, I tried to self-educate myself, but the only resource you really had was the U.S. dietary guidelines, right? So the food pyramid. And the food, you look at the old food pyramid, I mean, there's sweets and oil on the top, and then dairy and ice cream, and then meat, and then, and then grains and fruits and vegetables. And, you could have all that stuff in moderation. And that's what I talk to my patients about, and that's kind of the dietary advice I personally followed. And when I reflect back, we talk a lot about moderation. Well, what in retrospect, one of the issues with that was, Monday the nurses are bringing some cookies in the office, and Tuesday there'd be donuts in the doctor's lounge, and Wednesday I go out for a cheeseburger, and Thursday it's someone's birthday, so I'd have a little cake and ice cream, and Friday would roll around and I'd pat myself on the back about how great I ate this week because I didn't have many cookies, right? So, I'm moderating the trees and losing sight of the forest, and I could kind of out-exercise that. I had been I ran track in college. I was a fairly successful road runner in med school in the early 80s. Started doing some triathlons in the late 80s, but then got married and had kids and kind of got away from all that. Still tried to stay active. But in the fall of 2010, I tore my meniscus plantar my knee, and I had to wait about 3 months to get it fixed just because I was really busy. And then, like most doctors, I was a terrible patient, and I didn't do the rehab. And next thing I know, I started to gain weight. And the first thing that happened is I started to develop an irregular heartbeat, atrial fibrillation. So I had a cardiologist, and he gave me some pills. And it turns out the atrial fibrillation was because I had developed sleep apnea from the weight gain. And so I had a sleep doctor, and he gave me a really sexy CPAP machine to wear, right? And then I go finally and get a physical, and my cholesterol's through the roof. I got borderline diabetes. And all my doctors are just giving me stuff. They're treating me just like I treated my patients, at the time, how I was taught. And again, that's what we call healthcare today, but it's not healthcare, right? Patient comes in, like take me as an example. You come in and you got AFib, and we give you some pills. Well, then it turns out it's from sleep apnea, so you get a machine, and then you got high cholesterol, and you get some more pills. And then, the path I was on already had prediabetes. I can guarantee you in the next 4 or 5 years, I would have been on pills for my diabetes. And then I would have had blood pressure issues. And that's what we add years to our patients' lives in that system, but we're taking away life from their years at every step of the way. We're waiting for them to get sick, and we give them drugs that have side effects, and we allow them to accumulate diabetes and cancer and, disability. And, I kind of knew in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. But not one of my physicians, and I trained at Washington University in St. Louis, and my doctors were all highly trained, well-respected world experts even in their field. Not once did any of them talk to me about my diet. And one day, I was laying on the couch, and I had a prescription for statin, prescription medication for cholesterol medication in my wallet, and I stumbled across on Netflix Forks Over Knives. And I'm like, wow, you mean food is medicine, really? And it was such a kind of a profound enlightenment, if you will. And like many people, we all have, including myself at the time, we all have a lot of cognitive dissonance of where our food comes from. And I knew what a vegan was at the time, but my perception of someone who's vegan, you're wearing Birkenstocks and tie-dye and hugging trees and, on and on. And I never really made the connection between food and kind of the ethics and compassion that goes from where our food comes from. And that came as I transitioned to a plant-based diet. But I started this solely for my own health. And within 3 months, without really any change in exercise other than just getting my knee back in shape, I finally got the rehab I should have done, before. I lost 30, 40 pounds. My cholesterol went from 260 to 150. My sleep apnea went away. The AFib went away. I had lifelong seasonal allergies and exercise-induced asthma. If I would go run when it was below about 50 degrees, I would cough and wheeze at the end and have to hit the inhaler. All that just disappeared. And I'm like, wait a minute, right? Again, how come I didn't learn this in med school again? And that's when I realized what healthcare really was. And, when we talk about the ability to add years to our patients' life and sustain life in their years, right? We all got to die. You just don't want it to be your fault, right? And so once you focus on the root cause of all these chronic diseases, that's when we can practice true healthcare. And so what's the root cause of every single problem I had? 90% of the cause was the food I was putting in my mouth and how much I moved and exercised and how I coped with stress and, alcohol and tobacco, which I drank some beer, but I didn't smoke. But the food primarily is what was derailing the train, if you will.
Hey folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.